Thank you, Chairman Leahy, and thank you for convening this important hearing. To the panel, thank you for your testimony, and to Captain Kelly and to your wonderful wife, Congresswoman Giffords, thank you for everything you're doing to bring, I think, an important message. We as a committee are wrestling here today, and we as a country are wrestling with how to respond appropriately and effectively to a whole string of horrific shootings, whether in Newtown or in Tucson, whether in a Sikh temple or at a state university like Virginia Tech. There are just too many of these incidents piled year upon year, and I'm grateful for all my colleagues who've engaged in this thorough discussion today about how do we balance things. One of the most important things, I think, is for us to get our facts right. A number of my colleagues have made a great deal of the number of cases of federal gun prosecutions going down. But my staff's pulled the most recent report from the Executive Office of the United States Attorneys, and it turns out that the number of defendants charged with federal gun violations is actually steady. In fact, in 2011, it was 46% higher than in 2000. So I just encourage all who are paying attention to scoring at home the numbers. What matters is the number of defendants actually prosecuted with federal gun violations. I've got lots of things I'd like to touch on, and I did want to say at the outset I'm grateful that our Vice President, Joe Biden, has led, I think, a very broad and searching conversation where he's listened, as I have, to folks across the country and, in my case, across my state of Delaware. And I've heard from parents whose children suffer from mental illness and who are really struggling to provide the care that they deserve and need, law enforcement officials, educators, community leaders, gun owners, sportsmen, people who are really concerned about how we strike the right balance and how we make our country safer. If I could, to Captain Kelly, first, thank you for leading Americans for Responsible Solutions. One of the main ideas you and your wife have advanced is expanded background checks. Could you just explain for me again how it is today that convicted felons are able to get their hands on weapons despite our current background check laws, and how we might fix that?
Well, currently, certainly Senator Cruz mentioned earlier the statistic of, I think he said 1.9% of criminals that committed a crime with a gun,
of
prisoners. Well, I want to just look at that for a second. There's also a statistic that says 80%, on a survey done of criminals, 80% of criminals got their guns from a private sale or a transfer. So by closing that part of the existing loophole, which is the fact that with a private sale or transfer, there is no requirement to get a background check, you could effectively reduce the number of guns in the hands of criminals. And we know from what happened in Tucson that if there was an effective background check, which includes having the mental health data and the person's drug use, in the case of the Tucson shooter, into the system, and if in fact there was no gun show loophole, I would contend that he would have had a very difficult time getting a gun. So the first thing that needs to be done is we certainly need to have a universal background check. If background checks are good enough for somebody who's a federal firearms licensed dealer, like Walmart, for instance, where I just purchased a gun a couple months ago, a hunting rifle, and I had to go through a background check, why isn't that good for other sales? Sales from a private individual or sales from somebody who is really kind of in business at a gun show.
Captain Kelly, if you would, as a gun owner yourself, how do you feel that thorough universal background checks of the types you described, either for purchase of weapons or for large capacity magazines, how would that affect or infringe your Second Amendment rights?
I don't think it would infringe my Second Amendment rights at all. You know, I think I am as a strong supporter of the Second Amendment as anybody on this panel. You know, I've flown 38 combat missions over Iraq and Kuwait defending what I believe is defending our Constitution. You know, I've flown in combat. I've been shot at dozens of times. You know, I find it very interesting that often we talk about putting the security guard in the school. That's been brought up a lot. And I actually think, you know, that's better than no security guard in a school. But from my experience of being shot at and what that actually feels like and how chaotic it is, and with the exception of Chief Johnson, I would suspect that not many members of this panel, or even in this room for that matter, have been in any kind of a firefight. It is chaos. I think there are really some very effective things that we can do. and one is, Senator, the background check. Let's make it difficult for the criminals, the terrorists, and the mentally ill to get a gun.
I agree with you, and I've agreed to co-sponsor legislation to this effect, but let me ask Mr. LaPierre. I just at the outset want to say I'm grateful for the work of the NRA in providing training in safe gun ownership to millions of Americans, and I hope you'll take into account the data I've offered on gun prosecutions. But I do disagree with a point you made in your testimony. You said, and I think I quote, that background checks will never be universal because criminals will never submit to them. And while that may be true, I think the point that Captain Kelly makes is telling. And if we, in combination, put in place tougher restrictions on straw purchases and tougher enforcement on those who buy guns legally but then sell them to those who shouldn't have them, and we put in place universal background checks and impose some responsibility on responsible gun owners to report lost or stolen weapons in combination, wouldn't all of these things effectively move us towards a country where the number of those who shouldn't have weapons can't get access to them?
No, Senator, what I think you're going to end up with is a huge, massive bureaucracy with honestly, a huge waste of police resources and money that could go into doing things in the police criminal justice area that would actually save lives. That study that you were talking about actually says where criminals get their guns, 39.5 from friends and family, 37% from street or black market, 11% from licensed dealers, 10% by theft, 1.7% at gun shows.
Right.
I just think that you're going to, if you try to do this universal background check, which sounds whatever, it ends up being a universal federal nightmare imposed upon law-abiding people all over this country. Criminals will ignore it. The federal government won't, we already know, won't prosecute. The vice president told at the meeting with our people, said they didn't have time to prosecute those type of cases. So what's the point of the whole thing? If you let the criminal or the mentally ill walk.
I'm almost out of time. Forgive me for the brief cycle.
Sure.
Just to take at face value the data you just suggested, it's not just closing the gun show loophole. It's also thoroughly enforcing those who transfer weapons bought legally to those who shouldn't have them. And an awful lot of the folks you cited are getting their hands on weapons inappropriately through so-called straw purchases or through illegal transfers. I just want to ask a question of Chief Johnson, if I might, because I see, Mr. Chairman, my time is almost up. I think it's valuable to have the input of law enforcement professionals. In your view, would this sort of a universal background check combined with aggressive enforcement of the transfers to those who shouldn't have them be a huge bureaucratic mess and a waste of police resources, or might it make a difference on the street for those of you who put your lives on the line for us every day?
I have to respectfully disagree with Wayne on this issue. Public safety, police, we are ready. We are unified on this issue that a universal background check will make our society a safer place, will make my police officers safer. It's absolutely essential.
Well, thank you, Chief. Thank you to the panel. I'll submit some more questions for the record. I see I'm out of time.